With that, let's jump into some common questions that we've been getting over the last few weeks, and I think this is really interesting. So, Chuck, I think this one will be for you and I mainly. But one common one we get is we operate plants in multiple countries, and
Mhm.
our assessments, they vary in quality, depth, and there of course there's the challenges of being dependent upon the assessor.
Mhm.
They've had assessments from the same organization, but different assessors and just completely different results. So the repeatability is just a huge one, right? So how does your platform ensure, a global consistency, both on that self-directed and guided assessments? I think the short answer from my perspective is that's exactly the gap that we designed for Resilion to close. So I think whether you're using a self-directed assessment model um, for your organization and in terms of efficiency, or whether there's a site leader, whether it's an auditor or OT, director that's using the guided model. Um, Resilient inherently provides the mechanism to increase the dependency and the repeatability of scoring
Mhm.
across the organization. And I think that's one of the aspects of that is because of the our IP of what we built into the Authentic RAG database, and then that's kind of a little bit of our secret sauce. Chuck, what would you add to that from your perspective?
So I would use what may be kind of a buzzword right now, but I think this is the best example of it that I've seen in a long time is the single source of truth, right? That's what we've really tried to make Resilion for anything OT cyber related, right? So you got the program in there, you know where to go look for what you're supposed to do, what the policies are, what the processes are, what the SOPs are. You when you're doing assessments or audits, you have a central place where all that evidence is going. You have a central place for the process to do the audit. So from a consistency point of view, it's huge, right? Because it's going to be the same. And I think, Roger went over the two different types, right? The self-directed, where you're getting a set of questions and at different positions within the plant manager, the operations manager, the controls guy or gal, and that's all happening at once, distributed. So it really increases the speed, but it's happening very consistently across all the plants, all the sites, right? So that's huge because you're getting the same questions answered, by the right people. And if you don't trust that initially, do the self-guided or the system guided, where you have a human in the loop, making sure that the answers that you're getting are complete and understandable. So you have two options, but again, all that evidence and all that the answers end up in one spot, one central single source of truth.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think another question that we get more on the OT side is, hey, policies are, they sound great at corporate, but it's operationally challenging to execute on the plant floor. How does your platform really ensure that standards actually translate into, well, just actionable? I would say that one of the things that probably didn't come out in that process builder, the unique approach that we've taken with the simplified visual building blocks of what defines that workflow. But behind the scenes there, for each one of those workflow elements, we're defining a centralized process that's repeatable, but then certain elements such as scope and things of that nature are locked at that corporate centralized perspective.
Yeah.
But we have an instantiation at that plant level where when it goes to that plant and that plant manager, Gary, for that plant, Gary can actually define who are the specific individuals and roles for the implementation of that change management process, right? So now what we can do is we can account for any of the localization and adaptable needs of that specific plant and where it can be tuned. Now that is information and telemetry is being rolled up so we can ensure that we're following that process. We're doing it in the most efficient manner. So I think that's kind of an interesting and novel approach I haven't seen out there in the market. Bill or Chuck, what do you guys want to add to that at all? Or
I mean, we just haven't seen this. We've seen some other sort of GRC things in the market, but they don't know anything about OT. There's nothing about the OT standards in them. There's nothing about 6443, et cetera, in them. So and they're not using the latest technologies. Like what we're building is sort of leapfrogging some things that were built years ago and not focused on OT. So
I think that great points. And the idea that, I guess if I take a step back, why did we create Resilion, right? Was to really help do what we're doing as consultants out there, right? And really boil that down into a way that the system becomes the consultant in a lot of cases, right? There's a lot of Roger and Bill and some Chuck built into the system, into that AI and just the way it works to really streamline the process and again, get that efficiency. So we really looked out there for other products and we couldn't find anything that was, maybe a piece here, a piece there, but nothing that brought it all together. So that's the other piece of Resilion, is really bringing all that different types of tools together in one place where, again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but the single source of truth, right? So.
No, it's a good point, though. It's a good point. Bill, one of the things that we get some really detailed level discussions in the last few weeks, with some customers is around metrics. And specifically when we talk to leadership, what metrics do we think really resonate to really show the return on investment of a governance program? And I think that's interesting because I think in OT security today, return on investment is not in our vocabulary. It needs
ROI it's always been challenging in security, and it's particularly challenging in OT security. Look, execs, board members, they don't want to see a list of vulnerabilities. They want to understand impact, right? We're trying to translate governance into three big buckets here. So risk reduction. How much business risk is reduced as we close governance gaps? Can we show it by site, by control? We can. Maturity advancement. A measurable shift towards your target maturity level, site by site, control by control. And operational efficiency, right? Like this stuff just takes a long time to do the old-fashioned way. Paying consulting hours for people to process documents seems very 2022. We can save a lot of time and cost with consistent process, fewer redundant audits, faster remediation. So there's a lot of inherent ROI there. When you can say, in the past 6 months, we reduced critical gaps by 35% across our highest impact sites, and we saved 1,200 hours of audit prep. That will get your CFO's attention. You'll be driving impact and achieving better security delivery.
Yeah, ultimately, it all comes down to making the business cases and getting investment to do the things that we know we need to do.
Yep.
I think another very common question we get is really hits your point on consistency, and that's balancing global consistency with really local operational realities. So to frame it this way, with companies that have dozen or even hundreds of sites globally, how does Resilion keep governance consistent across those regions while allowing for local realities? So I think one of the best responses to that is the tiered approach for execution is a business-centric way to how to execute a global initiative across a fleet of sites. Specifically, as Chuck mentioned earlier, when we think about a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and quite simply, we can define it as tier 1 is your critical sites where maybe the output of what you're producing there at that factory is actually producing an input ingredient of your supply chain to 10 of your other sites. So losing that site is absolutely crucial, right? So we need to treat all of our sites as not being equal in terms of the business. So by defining these buckets of criticality in terms of business impact, we can start to define, okay, where should we make those initial investments and prioritization? And that allows us to really map and align with the global consistency. I think that's one of the first points.
Yeah.
What would you add to that?
Well, because we keep talking about the global enterprise, right? There are issues, from a regulatory perspective that differ from region to region, right? We want to have a consistent program but then we also have to deal with those different regional requirements. And, in a large company, you may have some products that fall under, different regulatory agencies within a single geographic area, right? You may have something that's needs the FDA approval. You may have something that has EPA consequences. So, that's another thing that we track and make sure that the program is built in a way that it takes care of that, right? We know that you have plants in Europe, so you have to think about CRA or NIS2 or even individual country regulations. We know if you have a pharmaceutical plant, then it's going to have FDA implications, and you're going to have to be able to answer questions there. So, but again, it's all centralized. It's all coming from one spot and being governed, by the corporate program. So that keeps the consistency, even though there's different things you have to look at in different localities.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Chuck. I was just thinking probably one of the more common questions we get is, and I love this one actually. It's about driving adoption without overload or overly burdening the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think how that is framed is even the best governance program can fail if adoption's poor. That's the reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you drive adoption across these different personas that we've been discussing? From plant engineers to executives without overwhelming them. Bill, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think we start by meeting people where they are, right? Since I've been engaged in this OT security world, there's always been this, there's been tensions between like the IT team and the OT team and the engineering team and who's responsible for this and don't touch it, it's mine, and you're going to break production, et cetera. I've always preached empathy and curiosity as like easy, free things you can do to build cross-functional like progress. Don't just say you can't because policy, but say like, why is it hard? Like, help me understand. I think if you show an interest across functions, people engage. So in terms of how we built that, we've tried to take those experiences into this thing from the ground up, right? So we try to meet people where they are. An engineer sees what's relevant to his or her or their job, right? Clear, concise, technical prompts. An executive gets a dashboard with trends and risks, not technical jargon, right? So nobody's buried in information they can't act on, right? Like that is using what we've used in our experience to try and make it tangible to real people doing real work and not show them a bunch of stuff that's going to be in a different language that they don't understand and not be relevant to them.
I really like how you framed that, Bill.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's about the mission, right? And this is something I talk to the manufacturing sector about quite often. You know, as a manufacturer, your mission is to produce a product to your quality expectations, to the production numbers that you've set as your targets, and distribute that product to a point of sale and sell that product. Every other aspect and role within your organization is to support that primary mission. That's why you exist. So I think it's number one, understanding, okay, as a singular mission and bringing in the multifunction teams to really address this problem. Fundamentally, how Resilion drives adoption is we make everyone's job easier. One thing I've learned, if you want technology to be adopted, make me look smarter in my role and make my life easier. If you do so, I will be your champion. So we've tried to follow that simple approach of just allowing people to focus on what they really should be focusing on, and just being that force multiplier. So we can break some of the challenges in the space where, you know, oh gosh, we've got another tax on the business. Here comes IT. Here comes security. Here's another audit. Rather than thinking about an audit from a regulatory perspective, we try to frame it from let's look at this from an internal compliance perspective, because that is how we are looking at reducing risk across our organization, and show that we're progressing, and be able to present this to senior leadership. This being the information, and that's another point I think is, rather than a CISO or a director of OT security having to scramble on a quarterly basis to put together some board reporting slides, now the system can just generate, hey, this is exactly where we are. This is how we're tracking on our initiatives. And then one thing we haven't even discussed is being able to analyze the control effectiveness of the investments we've made on technical controls. So I think all of that wrapped together is a way that we can really drive adoption across the organization. But Bill, I think you put it really well. We meet people where they are and what their needs are.